Anyone had an imaginary friend as a kid? Yeah, I had an imaginary friend named Kogi, the bottlenose dolphin cardiologist. I don't remember this, but the story goes that one day my mum asked me where Kogi was, and I said he shriveled up and died, and we should sprinkle him on our pasta. Oh, right. Oh, just one thing. What? Well, a good question, but apparently 65% of kids had imaginary friends. Us 35% minority that didn't are curious. To those who did, what the hell was the deal? When I was a kid, I had an imaginary friend called Mr. Colgi. He wore a white safari suit and got nosebleeds a lot. I had a friend named David. If you can picture Chris Griffin, except with black hair, wearing biker dude clothes and really grimy, that's him. He was a dick. A 15-foot tall azure blue bipedal fish with the head of a man who is frowning, but his eyes are smiling. He wears a bow tie and his fins resemble shoes. Mate, are you making this up? I swear I'm not making this up. When I was 3 to 5 years old, I had an imaginary friend and he was a mouse that lived in butter. Do you want to have a quick guess at his name? Nope, he was named Herpes. Business duck. That's right. I can still picture him in my head. He was the back half of a tugboat and the front half of Donald Duck. He would do absolutely nothing except occupy seats that other people wanted to sit in. Like an aunt or uncle would go to sit down and I would tell them they couldn't sit there because Business Duck was sitting there and they had to find another seat. I present a very quickly done Business Duck. That is such a shitty Photoshop, I'm sorry. Oh god, there's no use denying it's awful because it simply is. I had 2 imaginary friends I called Tango and Cha-Cha. I was so attached to them I made my mum make them separate birthday cakes on my birthday. My brother had an invisible friend named Alice. She was pretty tame, just needed to have a spot saved at the table, car, etc. Then one day he just got sick of her and threw her out the car window as we were driving, saying, "Goodbye, Alice." When my mum was younger, she had an imaginary friend named Shaggy. When she was finished with Shaggy, she chopped him up and put him in the fridge. Fucking zoinks! My son had this imaginary friend, Ganja. She lived in the nearby pond, hair all over her face, ate through a slit in her neck, and we were expecting her any minute for dinner. I used to tell my parents that there was a half dog, half man called Norm under my bed, and he was wearing thongs. Oh god, thongs, flip-flops for those not in Australia. Oh, thongs as in, yeah, I thought you meant, you know what, don't worry. A buddy of mine had an imaginary friend named Bogger the Clown. He said Bogger the Clown would hop around with him in the basement and sometimes just show up in his closet. I found out Bogger the Clown had no lower half of a body and one eye. Yeah, fuck all of that shit. My daughter had one when she was 2 or 3 named Juju. He didn't scare her, but it creeped me out so much. I told her to tell him to go home, that he wasn't welcome. She told him to leave and I didn't hear about him for 2 months, and one day she looks up at me and says, "Hey mummy, Juju's back." And I was like, nope, nope, nope. Asked my niece to draw her imaginary friend, Serena. Oh, Serena looks friendly. Oh no, that's not Serena. That's Serena. I must draw you, as their name suggests, then took it upon themselves to depict what Serena would actually look like. Oh, yeah, sorry, OP. My sister had an imaginary friend called Milkhead. He was just a normal guy, but when he shook his head, milk would come out, analog smiley face emoji. Milkhead too was drawn, and again, with apologies that they'd made a nice-sounding imaginary friend seem scary. Hey, don't be silly, give yourself a break. There's nothing scary about a figure only you can see that every time you look at him goes... I've told this story before, but the creepiest thing about my son's imaginary friend was that he was so lame. My son said he had a triangle as a head and lived behind one of our chairs in his apartment. His name was Gail, and he always had problems at work and a boring job. Eventually got married and had to work more because of his wife and 3 or 4 imaginary children, and still lived in the tiny imaginary apartment. I felt bad for the guy. I had an imaginary friend that was a 6-foot-tall bald eagle with human-type characteristics and a graduation cap. He would always tell me facts and words of wisdom. I had an imaginary friend who was a half pig, half buffalo, and had wings, and was as small as the palm of a hand, and I made him up while I was on the toilet. I had a bear in a pimp costume follow me, named Grodo. He had a purple suit and smoked cigars. Me and him were the right hot chicks walking by us. I was 8. Kanuba schnappels. They were these weird poofy monster things that lived under my bed. They played the drums. They were called Chin-Chin, tiger-like creatures. We'd fuck shit up. Would ya? Oh, very cool. You know Chin-Chin means penis in Japanese. My son's imaginary friend is creepy as all get up. Hey, don't talk that way about Mr. Cuddles! I haven't thought of this in a while, but when my son was younger, he had an imaginary friend named Boney Akiki. Boney Akiki was a skeleton man. Honestly, my son only ever had the nicest things to say about Boney Akiki, so he wasn't very scary, even for a skeleton man. When I was 3, I had an imaginary friend named Usi, a cow in my native language, and he told me to try and flood the house. Boney Akiki head emoji! I had an imaginary dog called Fluffy that talks like a butler. Terrible eater. He was a man-sized centipede who ate tables. I remember having a rhino named, you right, Dave? Poocock Peacock was my friend. She looked just like me. We would play for hours, and she liked to do everything I would do. I remember her quite well. I also remember my older brother convincing me she wasn't real one day, and watching her just...
No. Groot. No.
I didn't have an imaginary friend. When I was 3, though, I used to insist to my mother that I was the boy from Norway. No idea why. I had imaginary husbands, one after another. They were all tiny, bald, rich little old men, and the minute one died, I'd get another. The last one, I was 4 years old, and he was named Harold Bug, and I killed him. Years later, I moved to Huntsville, Alabama, where there was a local meteorologist named Harold Bug, and it really freaked me out. About a year ago, my 4-year-old niece started talking to her imaginary friend, Michael Jackson. He was with us all the time. She'd whip out her playphone in the store and yell, "Oh, I better take this. Michael Jackson's calling." He has since been replaced by Prince Eric, who's a little bitch if you ask me. The name Prince Eric just screams bitch. My cousin's imaginary friends were named Sexy Salomon and Curtain Child. We never let her live those down. This would be a great band name. We are Sexy Salomon and the Curtain Child. 1, 2, 3, 4. My little brother had an imaginary friend. He was amorphous of shape. The kid's name was Globby David. My friend was named Sopper. He was a shithead. A deaf boy called Oni. Scissors is the terrifying name of my 4-year-old daughter's imaginary friend. Paris Jarris. Now that's a top tier name. Slumpy Lumpy. Hunan Wash Jackson. Her name was Egg. Bojo. Oh sorry, Bajo. Ooey Ooey and anthropomorphic Spaghettio. A rat named Taint. Bubbles. He was just a boy made out of bubbles. I had a crush on his mum, Mrs. Bubbles. I had your basic invisible friend. His name was... my 2-year-old nephew's imaginary friend. Meet Bruce. When I was about 4, I had an imaginary friend named Chuck. One day, I started screaming because I saw my dad run Chuck over with the lawnmower. About a year later, my brother grabbed some hamburger off the shelf in the supermarket and had me sound out the sticker on the front. Ground Chuck. My brother had an invisible friend named Tony Rigel. He was 6 inches tall and was elderly, and one day we found my brother crying in his room. Apparently, Tony Rigel had passed away in his sleep. We buried him in a shoebox in the backyard, so basically we had a funeral complete with a moment of silence for an empty shoebox. R.I.P. Tony Rigel. May we never forget Tony Rigel. R.I.P. in peace, Tony Rigel. Tony Rigel 2013. Hashtag never forget. His name was Tony Rigel. Not creepy disturbing, but a disturbingly shit choice in imaginary friends. My mum tells me that when I was around 3 or 4, I just used to sit and stare at the roof and talk to Jenny Bond, the then royal correspondent for the BBC. My 4-year-old son's current imaginary friend is Haris Sohail, a Pakistani cricketer. From the ages of 3 through 6, I had an imaginary friend called Mr. Arcudus. Mr. Arcudus was very tall, shaped like a sausage, and wore a Napoleonic-style uniform. One day, 3-year-old me was watching the TV, and the X Factor came on. I looked up at the screen, saw Louis Walsh, and said, "Hey, it's Mr. Arcudus!" And as kids' imagination continues to bleed into reality, let's end with a little girl said monsters were in her bedroom. To elaborate, her parents didn't believe she was hearing monsters in the walls. She is 3 years old. Her parents gave her a spray bottle to spray away the monsters, but ultimately it was 60,000 bees.